guys, so in this video I wanted to be a little bit self-reflective and give you a short-ish list of things that I wish I knew when I first started getting into jazz. So this list is entirely subjective and in no way exhaustive. It's just going to be random little facts that, as I said, I wish I knew when I started playing jazz piano. Now, I had to really restrain myself to keep the list to less than 100 items, because I really was quite clueless when I first started getting into jazz. Now, I've also decided to split the list into theoretical things I knew and practical things I knew. So here we go. Number 1. Ultimately, all music theory tries to do is describe different ways of mixing dissonant and consonant intervals using the 12 notes, whereby dissonant intervals want to resolve to consonant intervals. That's it. That's all of music and all of music theory in a nutshell. All you have to do is play some dissonant intervals followed by some consonant intervals, and you've got a song. So try and distill every theoretical concept you learn back into how it combines dissonant and consonant intervals. This is essentially the concept of tension and resolution. 2. Listen to lots of jazz. This is important. There are some things that you can only learn by listening to lots and lots of jazz music. For example, it's quite hard to teach jazz rhythm, articulation, and phrasing. You really just have to listen to a lot of it, internalize it, and replicate it until you're comfortable with the musical language. And don't just listen to jazz you like. Listen to subgenres of jazz that you don't like. Even, dare I say, free jazz. And when you listen, sit down and really listen. Block 10 minutes out in your diary, sit down, put your headphones in, and really have a listen to what the musicians or the soloist are trying to do. 3. Jazz doesn't have to be complex, so keep it simple. Many people have a misconception that all jazz is complex. And lots of it is, but it certainly doesn't have to be. So for example, keep your improvisations diatonic. Don't worry about modes or exotic scales, and do not allocate a different scale to every chord, at least while you're a beginner. That is just way too hard to process if you're still learning. Try and use as few scales as possible over a given song to free up your RAM or your mental energy, and keep it simple. Also, slow it down. When people first begin improvising, they have a tendency to try and fit in as many notes as they can. They think, oh, I can use a C major scale here. Let's see how many notes I can jam into this chord. Now, this is probably Coltrane's fault. But you don't have to improvise like that. Slow it down. Keep it melodic. Keep it lyrical. Just play a few notes with a few simple phrases. Keep it simple. And on a related note, use repetition. You don't have to create a brilliant new melodic line for every single phrase. Again, don't overcomplicate things if you don't have to. Play something, if it sounded good, play it again. Repetition can be a very powerful tool, so keep it simple. Number 4, people talk about melody and harmony as separate entities. But really, your melody is just an extension of the harmony. So if the chord you're playing is a C major 7 chord, and the melody is the note D, then you're really playing a C major 9 chord. Because, again, the melody is just an extension of the harmony. And therefore, the melody follows all the same rules as the harmony, in regards to things like available tensions and avoid notes. And finally, number 5, theory is easier than practice, and thus always runs ahead of practice. So practice a lot. Unless you're a theoretician, there's no use knowing what a secundal voicing is if you don't know how to play it. Now let's move on to things that I wish I knew in regards to practice. First, play guide tones. You cannot practice playing guide tones enough. They're used in improvisation, where you can target guide tones at the end of your phrases, and they can be used as simple shell voicings for chords in your left hand. Practice them with both hands separately and together until you are sick to death of them. Again, you cannot practice guide tones enough. They are really, really important. 2. The best way to learn is to play with others. Learning jazz is just like learning a new language. To be fluent in it, you have to converse in it, often and for long periods of time. So either get a friend who also plays music and start jamming with them, or go to any kind of open mic jam nights in your surrounding area if you're lucky enough to have such venues. And if worse comes to worse and you can't find anyone else to jam with, at least practice playing with backing tracks. Number 3, embrace mistakes. They are inevitable. They are a part of the learning process and a part of jazz. Indeed, it's more important to know how to recover smoothly from a mistake than to be able to play perfectly. This is, again, because you will not play perfectly. You will make mistakes. Deal with it. But if you can recover from them well, then most people won't even notice that they happened. This can be done by turning your mistake into a chromatic run, or by simply repeating your mistake so that people think it was intentional and that you are just creating tension. Number 4, master the basics before moving on to the more advanced stuff. Again, there's no use trying to learn the locked hands technique if you can't play a 7th chord. You'll just be doing yourself a disservice. And finally, and this is a big one, learn to play everything with both hands and in every key. So you want to be able to play the chords not only in your left hand, but also in your right hand. You want to be able to play the melody not only in your right hand, but also in your left hand. And you don't want to just be able to play in the key of C major. You also want to be able to play in the key of G flat major, or D flat major, or E major. Right, beginners sometimes assume that, your left hand always plays the chords while your right hand plays the melody. Now this is generally true, but not really. You really need to know how to play everything with both hands. For example, learning to play the chords in your right hand is really useful so that you can comp for people, that is accompany people, like if you're playing with a trumpet and you're in charge of playing the chords, you can play a walking bass line in your left hand and the chords in your right hand. But it's also important because you can then play arpeggios during your improvisation. If you can play the chords in your right hand, then you can arpeggiate the chords in your right hand and come up with a pretty interesting arpeggio-based or vertical improvisation. And this is not even to mention two-handed voicings. So, like I said, a big one. Learn to play everything in both hands and in every key. Cool, and that's it. So quite a wordy video, I'm afraid, this time, but I suppose that was kind of inevitable given the title of the video. But at the very least, I hope you found this little bit of indulgent self-reflection at least a little bit useful. Cool, thanks guys, and see ya.